Welcome to the Berkeley Research Group Thinkset Podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Newland. Berkeley Research Group is a leading global strategic advisory and expert consulting firm, providing independent advice and dispute consulting around the world to corporations, law firms, government agencies, and financial institutions. For more, please visit thinkbrg.com. We recently caught up via Skype with BRG Managing Director Joe Bohling. Before coming to BRG, Joe was Chief Human Resource Officer at Aflac and Senior VP of HR at Citigroup. Joe is a distinguished practitioner and leading voice in advocating for the Dynamic Capabilities Framework developed by BRG Chairman David Teese. Joe's expertise includes performance improvement strategies, executive coaching, and cultural advocacy. His business and consulting experiences span several industries, notably healthcare and manufacturing. And with that, let's get started. Joe, thank you so much for joining us here on the Thinkset Podcast today. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Eddie. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So diving right into it, you have an article coming out here in Thinkset. And in your article, you talk about a number of different issues, but one of them is a generational issue that you see upcoming for the C-suite. One of the biggest problems that you've seen as people and different companies are transitioning from baby boomers to Generation X. You want to expand on that a little bit for us?
Sure. As I mentioned in my article, Eddie, our research shows that every day 10,000 baby boomers are retiring. And the following cohort, as we call the Generation X, is substantially smaller in size. Take that sheer number and multiply it by the effect of what we call V.U.C.A, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Those headwinds in the marketplace, coupled with the Generation X being a smaller cohort in terms of sheer numbers, is causing somewhat the perfect storm in the marketplace that is really forcing most, if not all, major corporations to pause and really examine their succession plans and what they're going to do around the war for talent.
In the C-suite, you've got fewer people to fill the jobs and jobs that happen to be more demanding than ever. What are some of the basic recommendations that you would have for organizations?
Well, first and foremost, organizations really need to have a good sense of what we call their high potential population, the notion of their future leaders within their organization, not only internally, but have the ability to find these future leaders out in the marketplace. So with the cohort of Generation X being so much smaller than the boomer generation, what's occurred in the past when a boomer was either attrited from an organization, be it voluntarily or through performance or just retirement, there used to be anywhere from 5 to 10 backups for that particular boomer that was exiting the organization. Today, with the Generation X cohort being far smaller, most organizations are lucky to have one, maybe two ready now succession plans. So it's critical for organizations, especially the large global conglomerates, to have solid, if not world-class, high-potential future leader development plans that are very specific and customized to the V.U.C.A marketplace in terms of the demands and the needs for certain requisite skills required to not only navigate the current marketplace, but be prepared for the future challenges that the V.U.C.A disruption is causing.
So you mentioned right there global conglomerates. What's the difference between a global conglomerate looking to transition to a younger generation than maybe a family-owned business, and how it might be a little bit easier for the family-owned business versus the global conglomerate to make that sort of next step or have that bench strength, if you will, people waiting in the wings to come in and take over?
For the most part, the global conglomerates I'm speaking about are publicly traded companies that do business in numerous continents, many countries, if not hundreds of countries throughout the world. And with not only the VUCA headwinds that we were discussing, but just the cultural differences and the challenges by different region of the world and different parts of the different countries. There's a need to really be proactive in terms of what type of talent is needed for that particular role in that particular part of the world or specific country. So there has to be a lot of cultural awareness, if you will, for these global conglomerates. Put that against, say, a privately held company that may be operating in a single country or a single region within a country. That level of complexity around culture and finding the right talent that has the requisite critical experience or understanding of the different parts of the world, let alone the different parts of the business, that tends to be the biggest difference. And thus, it's somewhat trying to find the needle in a haystack, if you will, with a smaller cohort and having the need for a far more sophisticated, culturally aware, broadly experienced talent base. That makes it very difficult to find the right people to do these more complex global jobs of today and, quite frankly, the future.
So even though there might not necessarily be a smaller group of people that are capable of the job, it's that much harder to find the right fit, even if it is a bigger pool of people that they're looking at from the beginning. Without mentioning any names, I know you have worked with a lot of really big firms in this area. Do you have any personal anecdotes that you'd be willing to share to give a little bit of a context around this idea and an idea of some of the work that you've done with different firms?
Sure, happy to. Again, without revealing any specific clients, but to your point, my experience here at BRG and the clients that we serve, we do work with a lot of the global manufacturing firms in the world, for instance. And with these particular organizations, you're dealing with large complexity, presence throughout the world in hundreds of countries, the sophistication level required from where they are as a manufacturing company to one that's maybe evolving to a technology company. All those things said, it becomes imperative as you work to develop the high potential future leaders and, quite frankly, the current executives. It requires a special sense of customization, something that's really focused on each unique individual and their background and critical experience, where they are today, what they need to go through to prepare them for these larger, more complex, high velocity sort of assignments as they move around the world. So I think the biggest lesson with working with the large conglomerates is the ability to have very customized, focused interventions or coaching experiences, if you will, that are holistic, that just don't look at a particular business experience, but really go beyond the professional acumen, but oftentimes goes into their personal lives and their personal community that they surround themselves with, be it family or loved ones, versus just their work community.
You and I have talked about the complexities in working with companies in different regions. I believe there's a common idea, and I'm blanking on the exact term, that Japanese workers, for example, die at their desk because they work so hard. Can you talk about how you navigate cultural differences?
Great question, Eddie. And the Japanese term that you're referring to is called karitsu, and it is literally translated death by overwork. And Japan is somewhat the epicenter of this. As recently as this week, numerous articles around the revelation of people working over 100 hours of overtime per month on average, taking only 1 or 2 days off in a month, and literally dying at their desk. So the culture of always being on, always being present, always working to show your loyalty, your devotion to the firm is very much prevalent in Japan. And I think in North America as well, but it's understood currently that Japan, with their smaller population and their unemployment rate being so low, there is this sort of cultural phenomena that really it's somewhat an expectation to always be at work and to always be on. You have to examine each country, each region that particular organization or firm might be in that particular country and have a customized approach that really addresses the needs, the challenges, the cultural idiosyncrasies, if you will, of that company.
Yeah, absolutely. You've also used the term high potential population. In your experience, what characteristics do high potential individuals most often possess?
I think for all the large companies I've worked with, especially the Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies, first and foremost, to be a high potential, you have to have the intellectual acumen, if you will, high level of intelligence, high level of intellectual curiosity that tends to have you stick out, if you will, amongst your peers. And a lot of companies, as they source their candidates and bring new hires in, they're really looking to hire from the best schools or have empirical evidence that an individual has a high level of intellectual acumen. The other thing that we tend to see for high potentials is this perpetual sense of wanting to continue to always learn, or what I was calling earlier intellectual curiosity, willingness to tackle, embrace new, interesting challenges, a sense of becoming easily bored if they're not constantly challenged by learning something new. A third criteria, oftentimes, that we see in high potentials is the need for someone to have grit, ability to work hard, and persevere through challenges. Those top three items tend to be top of mind, coupled with, of course, hard work. High potentials tend to put in the additional hours, the additional effort, what we call discretionary effort, that many may reserve for their home life or hobbies. Many high potentials tend to put that discretionary effort into their work environment. So hopefully that gives you a perspective of maybe the DNA or the common denominator, if you will, of what constitutes at least the raw material for a high potential future leader.
Leaves me a couple of check boxes I need to work on. And another thing from your article and that we've spoken about in the past is this idea of a lot of the programs that you work with for your different clients are built around sustained peak performance. Can you give our listeners an idea of what you mean when you say sustained peak performance and the different pillars that build that?
Sure. The work that we've done around the BRG concept of what we call the sustained peak performance framework originally was developed from work I've done in prior work assignments that we used to call the corporate athlete. The corporate athlete, a lot of articles written on that and use of that terminology really centered on four pillars. The work around sustained peak performance, we've added actually a fifth dimension, if you will. But the four initial pillars of sustained peak performance really are the physical, the mental, the emotional, and what we call purpose. In the past, under the corporate athlete framework, it used to be called the spiritual pillar, but we're calling it purpose for sustained peak performance. And then the fifth pillar that we've added is community. Not only the work community that most of these executives and senior leaders have, but their personal life community, their family, their loved ones. And what we find is if you can focus your customized development interventions for these executives and high potential future leaders around these five pillars, maybe you address two or three, maybe you address all of them, or maybe you just address one of them. What we find is focused, customized interventions around these five pillars really can generate transformational change, not only for the professional success of these leaders, but really their personal lives.
And thinking about it, just looking at the five, the physical, the mental, the emotional, purpose, and community, I think most people can grasp pretty quickly what you would do to measure somebody's physical status. I mean, you can go in and get a checkup with a doctor and get a baseline, and it's pretty simple things to work on going forward. Most of them we can find in a health article or two, though obviously getting it tailored helps a lot. Can you give a couple of examples of things that you would work on or that you would focus on for a little bit more of the bigger concepts, the emotional purpose and community? The concept is great and it makes a lot of sense, but details always help when people are thinking about how this might apply to themselves and also their own companies?
When I first did this work in the past, and we used to term it the corporate athlete. The metaphor is clear. Most people are familiar with professional athletes and how they surround themselves with an entourage of nutritionists, psychologists, physical sort of trainers, people that help them truly be in the moment, giving their full energy and time and focus to a competitive event, be it the Super Bowl or whatever NBA championship, you name it. Similarly, with what we do with sustained peak performance, we're really equipping these executives and senior leaders with this notion of being able to manage their energy and focus. So, unlike professional athletes that on average have a 4 to 5 year lifespan in their athletic endeavors, most of these executives that we work with go for decades. They're always on 7 days a week. Every single moment during the day, they have to be focused. And what we try to help them with these 5 pillars is understanding that the way to lose focus is when you don't have balance between these 5 pillars. A lot of these folks that we work with truly, they step back in life and they wonder, why am I doing this? Is this just for power and money, or is there some bigger cause in terms of value that I'm aspiring to? That's really the type of work we do. And quite frankly, for each individual executive that we work with, it's a different combination, from work stress to personal stress to just being lost from a purpose standpoint. So discovering what particular issues that they're grappling with and facing, and then coming up with focus interventions to address those things, tends to be the most meaningful and transformational sort of effort on our part to really make a difference for these people, both professionally and personally.
A true holistic approach. Stepping back then a little bit as we close in here, I know everybody talks today about how work is more connected, iPhones, Blackberries, whatever you want to talk about, everybody emails at a touch, phone whenever you are, wherever you are. Is there any reason to believe that in, say, 10 years, the stresses executives may face will be any better? Or do you just see this being only the tip of the iceberg as we go forward?
I think as a firm, as Berkeley Research Group looks around the corner, as we see around the corner, we see as a firm, from my perspective, is the increase of VUCA, the term that I used earlier, the disruption that's going on out there in the marketplace. Again, technological, macroeconomic, geopolitical, you name it, VUCA is increasing. And that's going to require not only the current senior leaders and executives, but the future senior leaders and executives to operate at a pace a lot faster than what they're currently accustomed to. So my prediction in the next 10 years is people really have to step back and look at these 5 pillars of who they are, both as a professional and as a person, to ensure that there's proper balance there. We have senior leaders and executives that we work with that are in a state of crisis, both professionally and personally, because they waited too long. A lot of our clients today are trying to go from firefighting to what we like to call fire prevention, focused on those executives that are not yet in crisis mode, and really trying to give them a new perspective around these 5 pillars and come up with customized holistic interventions that really impact in a meaningful way these particular pillars of sustained peak performance. In that, we believe, as this sort of model framework catches on in the marketplace, even though it might get faster, more disruptive 10 years from now in the marketplace, we feel with our programs and what we're able to do today, our clients and the current and future leaders that we're working with will be better equipped to handle what the future has in store for all of us.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. We really appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll look forward to catching up with you soon down the line.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Joe. This Thinkset Podcast is brought to you by the Berkeley Research Group. You can subscribe to the podcast and access other content from Thinkset Magazine by going to thinksetmag.com. I'm Eddie Newland, and thanks for listening. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, position, or policy of Berkeley Research Group or its other employees and affiliates.